All right, good morning and welcome to the February 16th meeting of the Lextran Board of Directors. My name is Jill Barnett and I am the General Manager here at Lextran. This meeting is being held via live video broadcast today with the meeting room available at 200 West Loudon Avenue available for public comment for members who would like to join. Public comment can also be submitted by emailing info@lextran.com, which will then be shared with the board members after the meeting. I will now turn the meeting over to Chair Harding Dowell to perform a roll call.
Thank you, Jill. Dr. Capo.
Here.
Thank you. Mr. Ward.
Present.
Ms. Rogers.
Here.
Judge Thurston.
Here.
That is everyone that I was. Oh, Mr. Schoninger. Sorry.
Here.
Your video there. Did I miss anybody? I don't believe so. I think we have a quorum. We can continue. Is there anyone here for public comment?
I do believe we have someone that's in our boardroom for public comment.
We have two people.
Two people, great.
This is Scott Schutte, counsel for Lextran. If all the board members could have their cameras turned on for the purposes of quorum, that'd be greatly appreciated.
Thank you, Scott.
Are we ready to begin? Okay, so my name is Jack Adritis. I'm a senior at Paul Laurence Dunbar High School. I'm a transit advocate as well as a regular transit rider. I actually took the bus here today. And today I'm just bringing to the board's attention the lack of bus service to Paul Laurence Dunbar High School. Currently, Dunbar does not have any bus stop or bus service. At the moment, the nearest bus stop to Dunbar is an 18-minute walk away, the bus stop at Lion and Cave Hill. It's an unsafe walk and needs to be addressed. If that isn't bad enough, the bus stop is only served by outbound buses. That means you have to take a little, like I like to call it a scenic ride around Palomar to get to downtown. The combination of the walk and the scenic ride results in long trip times to get downtown. It takes 45 minutes to an hour to take the bus downtown from Dunbar. This level of bus service to a high school that has 2,000 students, many of whom rely on Lextran themselves for transportation, is completely unacceptable. This transit gap is putting many Dunbar students at a significant disadvantage. At Dunbar, we have the school buses that take students to school, and the ridership for those is about 1,000. So there's about 1,000 students that can't stay after school or can't stay after school for activities because the district buses, the school buses, only run before and after school. They don't operate, during the day. So this has resulted in many students losing out on valuable, life-changing opportunities. Educators know that students who participate in after-school activities are more likely to perform academically, socially, and have better long-term life outcomes. As a result of this problem, me and my fellow advocates have been working with Paul Laurence Dunbar Principal Betsy Rains to try to solve this problem. We've been looking into operating an activity bus, so a school bus that would run after school, but the school just doesn't have the money to operate that kind of service. So we really need your help, Lextran. We really need your help to at a bus stop at Dunbar in the short term. I mean, we're coming up to spring. Many students are going to be wanting to stay after school more. We really need your help with this, and we need this to be done quickly. Every day that this isn't done, there's a student who is missing out on a valuable opportunity because they don't have transportation. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Jack.
Hello, I'm Brendan Jarvis. I also attend Paul Laurence Dunbar as a junior. I pride myself on being an activist and leader within my own community, and I think something that Dunbar has recently come to accustom is the idea of equity and opportunity. And I think the idea of giving Dunbar, the bus stop that is greatly needed, is coinciding with this idea of equity and opportunity. Many students are missing out on vital after-school resources and education due to the fact that they can't stay after school and the fact that they may have other priorities that can't allow for them to stay after school, where a bus could fix this idea. As also a student journalist, I've talked to many teachers and students who also advocate for this idea of a school bus stop. So while there may be two of us here, I know that the entirety of Dunbar stands behind this decision for a bus stop, and that we have the support of nearly 2,000 students and I believe over 100 staff of Dunbar. I've done the research. Many other high schools have this same bus stop near or in proximity to their high school and also benefit greatly because of this. I've talked to many students from other schools as well that benefit and use this resource to their advantage. And I believe it is greatly needed for the school of Dunbar and for the students of Dunbar. Thank you.
Thank you, Brendan.
Thank you.
Jill, I apologize. It's been a minute since I've been in a meeting where we've had public comment. Is now the opportunity for any response from board members or staff?
Typically, we would provide a response at next month's meeting once we've had a chance to fully absorb and discuss those comments if needed. As I stated, Jack has also provided a document that will be shared with members of the board following his public comments that he offered today. So I will be sending that out after our meeting to you, and we will provide a response. I think you'll also hear a little something about their comments, or maybe adjacent to their comments later in this meeting in the presentation about the COA. So for the members that offered public comment today, I would offer that to you to keep an eye on the presentation from the consultants.
And Mr. Chair, if you would allow me, I just want to thank those two very engaging young men for coming to our board meeting today. They are clearly leaders in their community of their school and the community at large. And I just want to thank them. So thank you for allowing me to do that.
I will allow it, and I will second all your comments. Thank you, Judge Thurston. Great job, guys. Thanks for coming. All right, moving forward, if there's no further public comment, I'd like to present the January meeting minutes for approval by the board. Has everybody had a chance to review, and is there a motion to approve?
George, motion to approve.
Thank you, George. Is there a second?
Lindsay, Thurston, second. Oh, sorry.
Thank you, Judge Thurston. That's a second. All in favor, say aye.
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 Thanks, everybody. The meeting minutes are approved. I did not have a chair's report this month. We got enough on the agenda, so we'll move into the Finance Committee report, please. Mr. Ward.
Thank you. Finance Committee met since our last board meeting, and the main topic of conversation was a cash reserve policy. So when we get into the board actions later in the meeting, we'll go a little more in depth in that. We are just looking for a way to, one, ensure that there's no interruption in cash flow toward year end. In the past, we've had to have a letter of credit just in case we needed something. I think everyone's aware, but the bulk of our money, tends to come in November, December, when the bulk of the property taxes are paid, and so it's there as a contingency. And then the other purpose of it is to, in the event that there's some unforeseen circumstance, either caused externally or if there's some unforeseen use of money, then we'll address that too through a board action. We talked a little bit about a capital reserve account. So this is a little bit different. This would be for planned capital expenditure replacement, and we're still working on what that's going to look like. And then we also had a little bit of a conversation on an investment policy, which is, how do we manage the funds that we have in these reserve accounts? And so there'll be more conversation on that moving forward. Our next meeting will be primarily about the operating budget for fiscal year 23. We've also requested that David O'Neill, who's the Fayette Property Valuation Administrator, come to the meeting to give the committee, his input on where he sees property taxes going. There's a little bit of concern at the beginning of COVID that it could impact some of the commercial valuations, in some future years. I think most people have seen on the residential side, a lot of the prices have been going up. So, we'll get David's take on that, because that's a very important assumption that is made every year when we, look at the income side of the budget moving forward. And just so everyone knows, Dr. Acapo has joined the Finance Committee. So it's Jamie Rogers, Dr. Acapo, and me are the members that are on that committee. And that concludes my report.
Thank you, George. Appreciate that. We'll move into the performance report and financials.
All right, thank you, board members. I will offer Mr. Fred Combs to deliver the monthly performance report. Do want to say that this month, given that we have our COA presentation a little later in the meeting, our performance report might be a little shorter than normal, but that's okay. We will have some good discussion a little bit later on. So with that, Mr. Combs, are you ready?
I'm ready. Thank you. But we always have time for our mission statement. We serve people in our community with mobility solutions. I'm happy to present our performance from January, and we had a few highlights. Most of that was weather, and we had several winter weather events that had an impact on service. We were on snow plan on several days of the month. And I do want to make a note that when we are on snow plan or we are monitoring winter weather conditions, our staff really steps up and takes it up a notch. We've got folks who are here that on early morning shifts that maybe they're not used to being on, or they're here late to evaluate conditions, to make sure that we can move people around the city safely and effectively. So major kudos to our operations, risk management, customer service staff, and others who are here making that happen during those winter weather events. We also participated in a kickoff meeting for a new Circle Road corridor study that's led by the Lexington Area MPO and the Division of Planning. That study is just now getting underway, starting to evaluate those existing conditions. When we have some more information about that, we can certainly share. And kudos to our Human Resources Department. In the month of January, they conducted 22 interviews for bus operators, and I think that's the most interviews for bus operators in a single month for the fiscal year, which is certainly impressive considering all the snow and winter weather that we had. So kudos to Human Resources team. Two commendations to share from January, both from bus operators. The first, I was unfamiliar with the Lexington Green area and Route 5. I appreciated the time that Todd Birch took showing me the inbound and outbound stops, as well as the next several times that the bus would be coming. And the second commendation, I wanted to commend Lamont Martin for helping me get off the bus safely on Saturday on the outbound Tates Creek bus. So kudos to Todd and Lamont for those commendations. A brief ridership report on fixed route. We're seeing in January the trend that we've been following for the last few months really show up. I mean, you can see the green line definitely follows the dash line and the gray line. But put that in context that we did have the winter weather impact, and I would say the January fixed route ridership, it was pretty good compared to what I was expecting due to the weather. And then on the paratransit side, I think maybe the weather impact comes out a little bit more clearly. We did see a bit of a decrease compared to what we would normally see, which certainly shows up in the next slide, the percent change relative to monthly average. So that gray line, the paratransit, definitely took a hit in January, whereas the fixed route has sort of stayed steady over the last few months. So that's something we'll definitely keep an eye on moving forward, of how much of that is due to the weather or other factors. So our January system productivity, again, the ridership we just talked about, the revenue miles and hours, we're on track to what we've seen, as well as our production factors. On the safety side of the house, we did see a small tick up in preventable accidents and injuries. Again, January was a bit of an atypical month due to weather, but year to date on both accounts, we're still, I think, within a reasonable range. Same thing on paratransit. days of lost time, work compensation claims, those things are also tracking fairly well for the fiscal year. And lastly, on maintenance, our 49 preventive maintenance inspections in January, that continues our streak. So we're a little over 2 years now of completing all of our PM inspections on time. And we had 6,183 miles between roll calls for the month. That's down a tick from where it has been, but still, year to date, we are looking better than we were last year. So things are looking good in maintenance as well. I know that was a very, very quick run through the KPIs. Happy to address any questions, and if not, I can turn it over to our finance team.
Just a quick question,
Sure.
Brad. Remind me what changes about service during a snow plan day?
There are some areas in the city that is not safe to drive on the streets for snow plans, so our routes might get a little bit smaller. We can do different schedules if we need to do different schedules. In the very rare case, we could suspend service, which we did have about an hour of suspended service during the month of January. So that's the plan that we follow. We've got an additional set of route traces that we can share with the public should a route or all routes need to be placed on snow plan.
Great, thank you.
Brad, I had a couple follow-up questions. I saw the New Circle Corridor Road Study. That's similar to the Nicholasville Corridor Road Study. Is that correct?
It's close. I mean, it definitely has the land use and the transportation component. Certainly, I don't think a BRT is on the table the way that it was on Nicholasville Road, because those two corridors are different in that sense. The New Circle Road Corridor is a little bit, I would say, broader and permeates into the neighborhoods around New Circle more so than it did on Nicholasville Road. Some of the outcomes might be similar, like with the regulatory frameworks and land use considerations and development patterns, and those sorts of things will be similar to what we saw in Imagine Nicholasville Road. The transit component will certainly be different, because I don't think that New Circle is at this point a feasible place for a BRT. But we do need to think about how we are serving it with fixed route, or if there's any sort of other kinds of service models that could help support transit service there.
Thank you. And then after that one, was there a third one planned in the future?
Well, the plan is to do several of these as we go. I don't know which corridor they're thinking of next, but hopefully we can move around the city and go kind of arterial by arterial and cover some ground that way.
And that just spoke the Nicholasville Corridor Study. That's a 10, 20, 30-year plan. But any updates since I forget, I think it was planning that presented to us on that plan?
Yes, we have discussed the next steps of implementation of some of that, of what came out of the Imagine Nicholasville Road Plan. Certainly we have to have significant input by the state, because the state does control Nicholasville Road, and some of the treatments, like the R-cuts and the different configurations, signal configurations and timing configurations, those are sort of the nearer term steps and ideas. Those things need to be in place before we can think about significant modifications to the transit service, because the local Route 5 that we have on Nicholasville Road is sufficient to the way that the context is now. So those things are coming first. We need to do, if we are thinking BRT further into the future, that's that more 10-year and beyond horizon, then we would need a study to think about what ridership generation would be, what the operational costs would be, and to think about the implementation from the transit side. So right now it's a little bit more of the highway flow, traffic flow, what to do with the reversible lane section of Nicholasville Road. And then as that moves sort of forward, we're still thinking about the long-term implications of transit on the corridor.
Thank you. And then one final question. All of these are land use questions. I saw you guys had an on-the-table meeting. Is FlexTran planning on hosting any of those meetings for our riders?
Jill was a part of those meetings. Is that right, Jill?
I've been part of some, as well as Emily's. I do believe we are going to host at least one and potentially more.
And we have hosted those in the past. So, yeah.
Yeah, so if we plan on hosting any of those, I think keeping us abreast. I know last time transportation was a top issue that came out of on the table. So write up our constituents' main priorities to continue having those conversations. Thank you.
Thank you.
If there are no other questions about the performance report, I am happy to turn this over to Miss Nikki Falconberry, who is with us today for our financial report.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
We are looking at financials through the 7th month of the fiscal year. We're very happy with the financials at this time. Our operating cash, you see, is a little bit different from last year. Most of that is the timing from grant funds. So we will be drawing down some grant funds in the next couple of months. So you'll see that balance go up just a tad. I'll be glad to answer any questions on the balance sheet if you have any. Otherwise, we'll move on to the budget or expenses versus budget. Okay. For the month of January, we are right on budget with our property taxes. We are very pleased with that. We're watching those very closely. We have taken in more money than we did in 21 and 2020. So we have been very pleased with that, and it's growing at the anticipated rate that we thought it was when we did the budget. The passenger revenue is a little bit over budget, about $100,000 over budget, so we're always happy to see that. Our federal funds are right on where they should be. Like I said, sometimes the federal funds differ because of timing, so we're very happy with those also. State funds, we do have some state funds that I'll be drawing down in the next couple of months, so you'll see those show up on the financials in the next couple of months. Our wages, as we've said in the past, are a little bit over because of overtime and because of the ratification bonus for the union back in October. Everything else is pretty much under budget at this time, so we're very happy with that. We're continuing to monitor the same ones that we usually talk about: diesel fuel, paratransit, things like that. So it seems to be right on track, but I'll be glad to answer any questions that you may have.
Nikki, my only question, and maybe at the next meeting we could break it out, is I think we have 32 open positions. So I was just, and I know you're saying it's overtime, so curious that our wages are over our budget, and I'm assuming because what we're doing is because we have so many open positions, we're paying more in overtime, so that's why we're not seeing the gap in wages.
We are paying more in overtime, but also we did the ratification bonus that we did in October, $1,100 each person for the union was not in the budget, so that was naturally going to put that over budget. But overtime is up a little bit to compensate for those open positions.
Thank you. But the most significant part was we hadn't budgeted for a ratification bonus. That's in this budget. So next month, we may hypothesize that because we still have many open positions, our actual is not going to be over our budget.
We may still be over budget because of some of the overtime positions for the operations department. That's usually the overtime that we see is for when we have operators that are on long-term leave or any vacancies or any illness or vacation. That's usually the department that we see that's over on the overtime, but they have been monitoring it very well, so it has gone down some.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you all very much. Have a nice day.
Thank you, Nikki.
Thank you, Fred. Okay, I think we have 2 action items still. Jill, you want to start with the reserve policy?
Yes, that is correct. So our first action item for the board today is Resolution 2022-02. This is the Lextran Reserve Policy that Mr. Ward spoke on earlier in his Finance Committee report. I also do want to call the attention of the board and also state publicly that the policy that is here for presentation during the meeting today does differ from the one sent earlier in the week in the packet. Because it has been updated, I believe, and Scott, you can weigh in, Scott, our legal counsel, I believe we will need a motion to suspend the 48-hour rule, which is Article 4, Section 4 of the bylaws. That law states that anything the board considers for action, they should have reviewed 48 hours in advance. So before we have a motion to consider the cash reserve policy, we will need that that motion as well. But as Mr. Ward said, this just establishes the policy itself. We've never had a defined and established cash reserve or contingency reserve policy. So this establishes that policy, establishes what the minimum amount is, and also outlines conditions for use of the policy, which would be in an emergency situation, and that the board should be notified at the next regularly scheduled meeting. So I'd be happy to
Yeah, this
answer
is George.
any questions.
I'll make a motion that we waive the 48-hour notice.
Okay,
Is there a second?
I'll second. This is Lindsay.
Thank you, Judge Thurston. All in favor of suspending the 48-hour rule, please say aye.
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 Thank you. I think that motion carries. Are there any questions about the substance of the revised language? Seeing none, I think we'd entertain a motion to approve Resolution 2022-02.
George, motion to approve.
Thank you.
Second.
Second. Thank you, Dr. Capo. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Motion is approved.
all right. Thank you, board, and thank you, Finance Committee, for your work on the cash reserve policy. The second action item that we have today is Resolution 2022-03, and this is requesting the board's approval to proceed with the task order for Kersey and Kersey for architectural and engineering services at 19 bus stop locations. You may recall that back in 2019, the board approved a contract with Kersey and Kersey for A&E services. So we are under active contract with them now. That contract outlined a general task of improving accessibility at bus stops and noted that a refined scope would be developed and that the task order would be issued for that particular work. Earlier in this fiscal year, in 2021, the board approved a contract with Shellcon Construction for bus stop improvements at 19 locations. Today's resolution is also in alignment with those 19 locations. This issues the task order for Kersey to do the architectural and engineering work at the locations where Shellcon will do that installation. Kersey will do scope and design work, land surveys, some civil engineering work at those sites. They will submit the permits and necessary documentation for us to LFUCG, do some overall construction management and administration, and hold meetings with us and with Shellcon. So the cost of the engagement today is $82,211.22. The source of that funding is our federal $5310 that we have discussed for the RAMP program before, with a 20% local match from our local mass transit fund. So that was a mouthful. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to entertain those. We also have Ms. Cheryl Kersey on the call with us today from Kersey and Kersey.
This is George. I'd like to make a comment before we vote on it. And this is an issue that's come up before in board meetings, and it came up several times in the Finance Committee meetings. Rick Chrisman, who's a former board member, was pretty passionate about this, and trying to get as much money into in making these improvements as we could. We felt that it was important to show the whole community that LexTran is investing money in places that impact the riders of our system. And the Finance Committee was very supportive of this.
Thank you, Mr. Ward.
This is Lindsay. I have a question, and I'm sorry if I missed it in your statements, Jill, or previously. How are the 19 locations identified? Is it just a need base or some other rubric?
It's primarily need-based, and is based on, a lot of it's based on ridership. So locations where we meet a certain threshold for ridership with passenger boardings per day. Some of the locations are also selected based on ridership generators at that location. So for instance, perhaps there's a nursing home, or that's not a good use of words, assisted living facility or something to that effect, or an apartment complex, a school, things of that nature that would generate ridership. So while they might not specifically meet the threshold, they would be right there, or be a location that we would expect that ridership to be in the future. Some are also selected for safety reasons, where it might not be necessarily a bench or a shelter, but we might be constructing a boarding pad, which is just a concrete rectangle or square for a passenger to wait at the bus stop, and provide them with a safer location to wait. Mr. Combs, would you like to add anything?
One more addition to that. Back a few years ago, we did an inventory of all the stops in the city. And as part of that inventory, we evaluated accessibility for each stop. So that was looking at sidewalk connections, making sure there's space for wheelchairs and space for the ramp of the bus to make sure that the connection for those with disabilities is there. We also use some of that information to prioritize those stops, which have those other, the ridership is there and the proximity to generators is there, but also we could evaluate or, prioritize those stops which might need accessibility, an improvement in accessibility as well.
Thank you.
Right, this is Christian. There's one thing. Two quick things. Were there 50 total that we were trying to? I was trying to remember the total number of stops we were trying to do under that ramp program. And then the second question was if we could either the next meeting or we can talk about when it's next appropriate. At the beginning of the process, you shared a map that had kind of dots for where the locations would be. I'd love to be able to see like an updated version of that.
Sure.
With the stops that have been included.
Yeah, we can absolutely do that. We did sort of start with 50 was the rough number, and I think the idea was we will go until we run out of money. But we also, since we started this program, we've gotten in partners who have looked to improve their businesses. We did the things at Beaumont Circle. We've done work with Amazon and other partners around town. So that is part of some of the work that's done here, but not everything. So that's how we've taken ramp. The idea was started with accessibility, and we've grown it from that to include other partners as well. So we can certainly get together and update a map, and the timing would be great. As this work moves forward into the spring and summer, as we start to get some of these stops completed, we'll definitely share those with you too.
I've got one last question. Is it our best practice at this point to connect a boarding pad or a shelter to a sidewalk?
Yes.
Yes.
An existing sidewalk.
And we try to be careful. We'll do sidewalk gaps that connect to those pads. We're trying to be careful not to do sidewalks. Like, we want to make sure that the stops are accessible. If an entire corridor or a block or something doesn't have sidewalks, that's really not what we're looking at here. And we have partners with the city that we work with to try to get those prioritized and let them do their part, and we would be responsible for the stop.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? All right, if not, I'd entertain a motion to approve resolution 2022-03.
This is Lindsay. So moved.
Thank you, Judge Thurston. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Dr. Capo. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All right, thank you.
All right. Thank you, board members. Happy to get that passed today and get that work going. Do have a quick change order report today. Nothing super dramatic, but do want to call your attention to some of these things. These are not items that require any board action today. These are for information only. So we do have change orders with Paycom, which is our vendor for our HRIS system. So our HR tool and our payroll processing tool is Paycom. So there's a slight increase in the cost there due to some standard contract language. We have a change order with Galls, which is our contracted vendor for operator and supervisor uniforms. That is due to increased prices in the market that Galls is seeing. They've needed to raise their prices a bit as well. And our last one is with Next Century Technologies. They are our contractor for Microsoft Office products. Microsoft has increased the cost of products, which many of you might be seeing in your business as well. So again, none of these are amounts that require board action, but they are for your information today. Mr. Dowell, I believe the next item on the agenda is old business, the presentation of our comprehensive operations analysis to date. And we have our consulting team with us today from Nelson Nygaard. If you were with us for a previous board meeting where they presented, you might have remembered them as CTG. CTG has been absorbed by Nelson Nygaard. That is a change that has happened in recent months. So I believe we have Dan Nelson and George Meyer on the call today to give us our presentation. So I will turn it over to them.
Okay, great. Thanks, Jill. Give me just one moment here. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen.
And Dan, while you are doing that, I'm going to ask Fred Combs to perhaps tee up your presentation, since maybe not all board members were here before. So Mr. Combs, if you would speak on that a little bit and give some board members an idea of what our comprehensive operations analysis is, when this started, and why we are doing this.
Absolutely. So a comprehensive operations analysis investigates every aspect of our fixed route system to ensure that the resources that we're putting out on the street accurately reflect what we're seeing in the city. So as you know, a city will change over time. Different developments happen, neighborhoods change over time, and we need to be able to make sure that we're putting service where it's needed the most. So that's what we've done with the COA. The typical sort of horizon line for a COA is 5 years. We'd like to do this every 5 years. So what we're going to see is a set of near-term recommendations that really looks at the next year or so. And then sort of the midterm recommendations. So that's the next, 2 to 3 to 4 years. And then the longer term recommendations that will be in the document, not necessarily discussed here, are those bigger. I mean, that's the sort of the BRT, those ideas, those things that we want to keep in paper, keep in mind. But we're more focused on sort of tangible changes that we can do in the system today and in the short term to make improvements. A COA includes substantial amount of public input. And, this hit during the pandemic, to which public engagement and public input changed. But we do have, lots of public input on transit from different places, different studies. The most recent, Imagine Nicholasville Road, is a place that we drew some public input from. The last comprehensive plan update with the city, we drew some, and On the Table was another. So we had different other studies that we could tap to build the initial public input to feed into the initial set of recommendations that you're going to see here today. And then what's going to kick off today is the public engagement period that we will get direct feedback on what these ideas are. So Dan, it looks like you're ready to go.
I am. Yeah. Can everybody see
Awesome.
the screen okay?
I can.
Excellent.
Yes.
Okay. I'm getting some
Awesome.
thumbs up. All right. Well, thanks for that context, Fred. I think that's really helpful to kick things off here. Again, my name is Dan Nelson. I'm a principal with Nelson Nygaard. I am joined this morning by Cheryl Kersey, who is our project director. As you recall, this is under the A&E on-call contract. So we're working closely with Cheryl on this. And then I'm also joined by George Meyer, a senior planner in our office. George is one of the key architects of this plan. So I'm going to be calling on him to dive down into the weeds on a couple of these recommendations if you guys have questions this morning. So we're excited to share some of our initial recommendations that we've developed over the last several months. We're going to cover just a quick recap of our planning process leading up to these recommendations and some of the assumptions that went into the development of the plan. And then I'm going to summarize our near-term and midterm recommendations. As Fred mentioned, we do have a longer-term horizon that we've looked at, but we're just going to focus on the near-term and midterm today. Then finally, we'll wrap up with our next steps leading into the public outreach process. And then finally, we'd be happy to answer any questions. And like last time we talked over the summer, if you all have questions as we're going through this, please feel free to jump in and ask away. All right, so we'll start with a quick recap of our COA timeline here. As you recall, we talked over the summer and we presented the initial findings of our initial conditions assessment, presented the findings of the onboard survey. We took that information and developed our initial recommendations. We conducted a number of workshops with LexTrans staff and produced our near-term and midterm recommendations. And we're going to share those with you today. And then, as Fred mentioned, we're going to launch into our public comment period here over the next several weeks. And once we get that feedback from the public, we're going to refine the plan if necessary, and then start to put together our capital needs plan as well as our phasing and implementation plans leading into the final report. So we do hope to wrap up the study this spring. Hopefully LexTran can start to implement these improvements towards the end of this year. So we're going to talk today about our near-term and midterm plans, and we want to start with providing an overview of the phasing and objectives of both of these plans. In terms of the near-term plan, these are improvements that LexTran could implement in the very near term. Our planning horizon is through the end of this year, so these are the improvements that we could potentially program for implementation in later sign-up periods of this year. Our budget target for this plan is within 5% of the existing baseline. So these are essentially a cost-neutral recommendations to improve the service within the existing budget capacity. We set out a couple objectives for ourselves for this plan, and those objectives are to adjust the alignments to improve productivity of the service, improve access to key locations throughout the community, and provide better connectivity. And I think you'll see in our recommendations that we've really tried to connect this system in ways that aren't provided today. So we're trying to provide different options for LexTran customers to travel about the system without necessarily having to go downtown to the transfer center. Then finally, we will be making some adjustments to schedules that will hopefully translate into reliability and on-time performance improvements. For the midterm plan, that's a little bit longer term horizon. Our target years are 2023 to 2025, so it's roughly an additional 3 years past the near-term plan. Our budget target is a slight increase in resources with a 5 to 10% increase over the baseline. Our objectives for the near term are really to adjust routes to account for new development that's coming online. So we know that there's new development on Georgetown Road at the Dairy Farm development, as well as in the east side of the city at Polo Club Drive with the new Baptist Health Hospital. So we're going to adjust the network to prepare for that development coming online. We're also prioritizing evening and weekend improvements as well as some frequency improvements. And we have also identified a few areas that might warrant exploration of new service delivery models such as on-demand service. We took a close look at the customer satisfaction data that we collected during the onboard survey, and we showed this to you back over the summer. Overall, LexTran is receiving high marks from customers. This data paints a good picture that LexTran is really serving its customers well. We did notice that the one area that could use improvement is weekend service. So I think you'll see in our recommendations that we have prioritized trying to provide more consistent service on weekends, on Saturdays and Sundays compared to weekdays. So that's really a big priority as part of our plan. And based on input that we've seen from other studies that have been conducted, we know that customers have also asked for more direct service, better frequency, and more evening service. So those are also priorities that we've tried to accomplish here.
Dan, how many people were surveyed?
Oh gosh, I think it was around 15 to 8.
I think it was around 3,000.
3,000. Okay.
I'll tell you what, or you keep going and I will look it up and I'll be back with the answer.
Yeah, we'll get you a more precise answer there.
All right, thank you.
Okay, so let's go over the near-term recommendations. So the highlights of our near-term network, which we have shown here in this map, are that we have improved network connectivity, as I mentioned. We're also providing services that are faster and more direct. Again, we're trying to reduce transfers to the extent possible and provide more direct service, providing more consistent weekend service, and finally preparing for future development. So I'll summarize the key changes that we've made to the network that support these outcomes. One thing that I do want to point out right now, because we had some great comments at the beginning of this meeting concerning access to Dunbar High School, and that is actually one of our key recommendations here to the Route 13. We are proposing that we add a separate service pattern to serve select trips to Dunbar High School. So that's this gray route here, serving Broadway and Man o' War Boulevard. We'd have a separate pattern that would serve the high school in the morning and the afternoon. And we can work more closely with Dunbar as well as staff here at LexTran to identify exactly what time we need to serve those trips. But it's certainly the intent of our recommendation to provide that new access to that high school.
Dan, were there other high schools impacted?
I believe we've retained service to all other high schools in the area.
I would say that there is one, Bryan Station, where currently Bryan Station does not have a good direct access downtown. In our current service model, in this proposed service model, it would have a good connection downtown. So there's certainly an improvement there.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Fred. And then there another high school off Richmond Road that is going to have slightly different service today, but it will retain service going forward. So in terms of improvements to network connectivity, there's three key changes that we've made that reflect this outcome. The first is that we have revised Route 17, which, as you recall, is a connector service. It does not provide access directly into downtown. It's a relatively underperforming route, but it does serve an important area that tends to have a lower income population. So it's an important community that we need to continue to serve, but we feel that it could be better served by tying in directly downtown. So we've realigned that route, and that's the Route 17 shown in blue here. Instead of creating a crosstown route as it serves today, we are taking it directly in downtown via Limestone. Another change we've made here is the Route 18, the Center Parkway crosstown. As you recall, this route currently ends in the Southeastern Hills neighborhood. We're proposing to extend it over to Nicholasville Road to Route 5 to start to connect all of the spines of the southeastern arc of the system, from Nicholasville Road all the way over to the Hamburg area to the Polo Club Drive area with a direct service. And we're actually proposing to slightly increase the headway on this as well. Then finally, Route 8 Versailles Road. We are creating a new crosstown route. Well, it's actually a hybrid of a radial and a crosstown. We're extending Route 8 to serve Southland Drive. And to do so, we eliminated the existing Route 16, which is, again, is an underperforming route. And we've replaced the segment of the 16 on Southland Drive with this new crosstown. So this will provide great connectivity through these neighborhoods over to one of the key corridors in the system, which is Nicholasville Road, and really provide some access improvements there. So we propose to retain two service patterns on the Route 8, one pattern going to the airport and one pattern serving this crosstown connection. In terms of improvements to provide faster and more direct service, we are proposing to adjust Route 6 to directly serve the North Park Marketplace Shopping Center. As you recall, there is a Walmart here that's a high driver of ridership. Currently, it's served by the Route 4 and only one direction of travel. So we're proposing to provide front door service to this location in both directions. So the route would essentially terminate at that shopping center, that Walmart, and then the route would turn around and go directly back downtown. So this is a quick shuttle route. It's going to have frequent service, about 35 minutes or faster or more often. So that's a vast improvement over the service to that area today. And then Route 10, Hamburg Pavilion, we are creating more consistent bidirectional service along the entirety of Route 10. So today, Route 10 is circuitous. It jogs down Liberty Drive to make some deviations into several activity centers in that corridor. We're proposing to straighten this out and provide more direct service out to the key activity centers at Hamburg Pavilion and up to Polo Club Drive. And we did this change in part to, one, provide better, faster direct access, but also to prepare for that future development. So as you'll see in the near term, or I'm sorry, in the midterm plan, this change leads directly to further changes we're going to make to serve the hospital in the future. More consistent weekend service is the next outcome. As I mentioned, this is the one area of improvement that customers have asked for most often. So we have proposed a couple changes here that will provide more consistent service on the weekends. So service that's provided during the weekdays, customers can count on it during the weekends as well. So the Route 18, as I mentioned, we made some alignment changes to this service. We are proposing that it operates 7 days a week compared to the 6-day-a-week service it currently provides. And then Route 8 for Sales Road. Route 8 itself today currently operates 7 days a week, but that Southland Drive segment does not. So with this new service pattern, we will be providing 7-day-a-week service. Then finally, preparing for future development. So there's two key areas that we focused on, one being the dairy farm development at the end of Georgetown Road. We have modified the Route 2 as well as the 22, and then added a new service, Route 23, which results in the restructuring of the service along Georgetown Road. So what we've done here is we've straightened out Route 2 to not serve St. Martin's Village. It stays on Georgetown. And that allows us to have enough time in the schedule to get all the way out Georgetown Road to serve the future development at Dairy Farm. So right now that the development's not there, but there is now time in the schedule to serve that when it comes online. Okay, so that's the biggest change there. And then to
let me ask can I ask a question about that? So people that will work at the new dairy farm development, will they be exiting on Georgetown Street and then walking in, or does it go into the development?
So I have seen some of the initial development plans for the dairy farm development, and there is an in and out that we will be able to use there. The plan at the moment, because that development extends quite a ways back towards Newtown Pike. So the plan is for not the bus to go all the way back to the back of that development, but certainly on the front side of the development, that's where we're roughly scheduled to turn around at the moment.
Okay, so pull in, pull out.
Yep.
Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Fred. And then our our midterm plan actually shows the route going up into that development. So in a few slides, we'll show you that. So as I was saying, St. Martin's Village is another important equity community. We want to make sure that we're continuing to provide good service to this area. So we've rerouted the 22 and provided a new route, the 23, that both will serve this neighborhood with 70-minute headways, and combined that will continue to provide 35-minute service within that neighborhood. And then folks there have the added benefit of the Route 2, which will provide 70-minute service during the near term. So if folks are willing to walk out to Georgetown, they now have 3 routes that they can access from that neighborhood. And then, as I mentioned earlier, Route 10, Hamburg, we have made those changes to prepare for the future development on Polo Club as well as at the hospital. So in terms of the...
Let me ask a quick question about the one you just said.
Yes, please.
Will be going up as far as Winchester Road?
Correct.
So there's a couple of things to keep in mind about this. First is the outcome of the tunnel that they're proposing that goes from Sir Barton across to Polo Club.
Mm-hmm.
That is a very, very important connection for us because it would save the Sir Barton from that point down to Hamburg, that we could catch Hamburg with a different route that you'll see in the midterm recommendations. If that doesn't happen, then we have the option of staying on Winchester Road, serving that way, and then pulling Route 18 up Polo Club to connect at Central Baptist as well. So we could approach Central Baptist from both sides, or Baptist Health from both sides, the Winchester Road side and from the Man of War side. So we would have 2 routes terminating there.
I've heard a lot of people talk about, the tunnel, they're calling it an underpass now.
Yeah.
But the mayor is very supportive of it, I think.
There is some support, certainly from the city. and the folks that I work with, I think everybody is just waiting to see the final price tag on it.
Great. Thanks, Fred. Okay, so any other questions on the initial changes that we've shown here before I move into the resource impacts? Okay, we'll move on. So in terms of the impacts to the bottom line, we have measured the changes to hours and miles. We're measuring our resource impacts by revenue hours and miles and peak buses here. So what we've seen is on the weekdays, there's essentially no change to revenue hours. On the Saturdays and Sunday service, we are seeing a fairly substantial increase, and this reflects the priority we placed on improving that weekend service. So the bottom line here is that the annual cost impact is within our 5% budget target. In terms of impacts to coverage and existing riders, the bottom line here is that we are making really no impacts to the overall ridership numbers in terms of riders that are covered within a quarter mile. And that's what this map shows here. So the blue outline is a quarter-mile buffer around each proposed route. And then we have the ridership by stop. And this is 2019 data. We are working on updating the ridership data with the latest numbers. So we'll update this analysis once we get that information. But based on our analysis of 2019 data, we determined that there is a 0% change in the number of boardings within a quarter mile. So where we have eliminated very small segments of routes, as you can see in some of the dots that aren't within that blue buffer, there really was no ridership to begin with there. So we have done our best to make sure that we're minimizing impacts to existing riders. On the other hand, population coverage has decreased slightly, so we're down 4% in terms of the number of people that are covered within a quarter mile of the bus stop. But again, we know that those people living there aren't riding the bus to begin with. Another key takeaway here is that we are not impacting equity communities at the same level as the general public. So our equity, or as measured by low-income households, the change is a 1% decrease. The general public is a 4% decrease. So we have prioritized maintaining service in our equity communities. Okay, so that's the near-term plan. Move on to just a few highlights of our midterm plan network. Again, we're preparing for future development here. In advance of the dairy farm development, we're adding a second vehicle to the Route 2 to create 35-minute headways up to the dairy farm development. And Mr. Ward, you can see here, you can kind of see here, our label is covering it, but we do show that this route is extended up into that development. The exact alignment will be TBD based on those final site plans, but the intent is to try to serve that the best we can. We've also added a new road to Liberty, a new route to Liberty Road to serve Hamburg and Polo Club. As Fred just mentioned, this allows us to take a slightly different approach to the hospital now. And again, if that tunnel or underpass comes online, this might look a little bit different. But the key change here is that we're getting to this development both from Winchester as well as from Polo Club Drive with the Route 18, and then we also have the new Liberty Road route as well. We've also modified Route 10, as I just mentioned, and then we've added a third vehicle to Route 18, and that allows us to extend Route 18 up to the hospital. So now we have direct, consistent service all the way from Polo Club Drive at the hospital to Nicholasville Road. Again, we're providing additional, more consistent weekend service in the midterm. We're adding another weekend route, Route 17, as well as Route 22. So now all core routes will operate 7 days per week. Then finally, we would recommend that LexTran explore new service delivery models. We have identified a couple areas that might make sense for a new on-demand service. So this would be a publicly available mobility on-demand service, and we have identified areas in the northeast and the northwest parts of the city that might warrant that type of service. And we can explore and define what that is and what that could look like in future discussions.
And
again, in
what
terms
are
of
the criteria you were using for identifying those sort of hotspots for alternative service delivery?
yeah, great
Like
question.
why those
So
neighborhoods? Short version.
yeah, low productivity of fixed route service. So where is fixed route service operating where the cost per passenger is much higher than the system average? So those are typically lower density areas that don't have very well connected roadway networks. So we're looking at high need areas and low productivity areas, right? So where we want to target where we can provide those trips more cost effectively. That's really what it boils down to. At the end of the day, and there's a number of different service models that you could look at to accomplish different desired outcomes. And there's point-to-point models, there's anchored models. It really just depends on what you're trying to accomplish with that type of on-demand service. But at the end of the day, we're just trying to retain service coverage or expand service coverage and quality at a lower cost per passenger.
Thank you.
Okay, so our impacts in the midterm, the bottom line here, again, we are within our 5 to 10% budget target. We're seeing slight increases in our weekday service hours and miles, slightly higher increases in our weekend resources. So again, we're within that target, but what we found is that we're right up against the top of our target. So that leads into the next part of the discussion before we wrap up here, and that when we started this process, we did want to identify areas that we could potentially increase evening service or increase frequency on certain corridors, but we found that there just wasn't enough, there's no fat in the system here. This is a well-designed system to begin with. There wasn't a whole lot of service that we could reallocate to produce additional improvements in frequency or weekend service beyond what we've provided or evening service. So what we wanted to do next was explore what it would take resource-wise to further enhance the system. So what we did was we developed some aspirational service standards, and I'll show those on the next slide. And then we costed out what it would require to increase frequency to bring all routes into conformance with these standards, or to increase service span to become in conformance with the standards, or to do both. So what would it take to enhance the system to provide this additional level of service to customers? So this table here shows our proposed existing service standards. These are similar to what you all have today, but we have proposed to include 2 new service types, the core frequent service type, as well as the new crosstown service type. And these are the current minimum headways and service bands that are provided. So if we propose an aspirational service standard policy that would bring the minimum headways up to 35 minutes all day on every route, and expand the service span to 1 a.m. in the evenings and start as early as 5 a.m. on most routes, this would really provide a robust level of improvement for customers in terms of accessibility and mobility throughout the community. So from there, we wanted to see, okay, how much would that cost if we did that to every route to make sure that these routes are in conformance with these standards? And what we found was, compared to the near-term plan that we just showed you, to increase the headways on each route, it's about a 20% cost increase. To increase the service span on each route, it's about a 13% increase. And to do both, it would be a 33% increase in the annual operating budget. So it's a substantial investment, and of course, this would probably not all happen at once. But we did prioritize these improvements, and we have basically a menu that LexTran can choose from moving forward and prioritize those improvements if and when additional funding becomes available. Okay, so that concludes the summary of our recommendations. Just to look towards the next steps here, we are preparing our public outreach campaign, and we intend to go out to the public starting in a couple weeks. Beginning next week, we're going to conduct internal engagement with LexTran staff. Then we're going to go out for public comment between February 23rd and April 1st. We're going to conduct some in-person events as listed here. We're going to do pop-up events at the Transit Center, conduct additional internal engagement as well as digital engagement. And then after we collect that feedback from the public, we'll revise our plan and then move forward with wrapping up the study. So with that,
Thank you
yeah, thank you.
for that. Just a comment that I wanted to make for the purposes of members of the board, particularly those members of the board who perhaps have never experienced a comprehensive operations analysis before at Lextran. I kind of wanted to offer a little bit of this perspective, and that is that in the past, our COAs have often started with a bit of a directive to the consulting team that, you know, we need to cut costs, or as Dan said earlier, we need to trim the fat. We need to be mindful of dollars. And while that, you know, was certainly prudent at that time, that goal is frequently in conflict with the ability to grow our ridership, or be aspirational, or offer service that is attractive to new customers. And so this COA, while still attempting to be mindful of our finances and of our dollars, and knowing that we don't have unlimited resources, takes a little bit of a different approach than just maintaining the status quo. It looked at those aspirational service standards, as Dan said. So I'm really pleased with where we are so far. You know, often I've been at Lextran a long time, and often over the years I've heard, or I've been guilty of saying myself, when someone asks about, can you do this service related, of saying, you know, we can't afford to do that, or that's not in our budget. We're not able to do that. But many times it's been a request that we didn't know the true costs. We didn't know what that would truly cost. And then this way, the consulting team is helping us to identify some of those true costs. I know board members probably have questions. This is not my time, so I will be quiet now and turn it back to the consulting team. And I think Mr. Combs has some comments as well.
I do have a couple of comments about our engagement period. First of all, for those who might be watching the stream, lextran.com/COA. That's going to be the landing page for much of this information. You can go there now and see how you can contribute a comment if you would like to. Now, on February the 23rd, we will add a story map to lextran.com/COA that you can go and interactively walk through the COA and provide your comments there. But I want to let everyone know who might be watching, you can attend these public meetings. We've got 4 scheduled in March. You can submit an email to info@lextran.com. You can call 859-244-2039 and leave a voicemail with feedback. And our customer service staff at the Transit Center all have comment cards that you can fill out, submit, and they will make their way to us. So those are the means that we have available to make comment if you would like to do so. Again, lextran.com/COA. It will be live. It is live to the public now to show you how to make comment, but the information about the COA will be live on the 23rd. And that is after we allow the larger internal engagement here for our folks at Lextran. So that is the plan ahead, the steps ahead, and ways that you can contact us if you have feedback. So anyone have questions about that process or the COA or anything else? We're happy to take those now.
My only concern is this is my first time with Lextran, but the cost, I was hoping for this to be revenue or cost neutral, but we're projecting 5% increase. And we know we also have to deal with salary inflationary adjustment going forward. We have a bargaining unit, and everything is unknown with revenue from the state and Fed. No one knows what will happen in the next 5 years. The federal money that we're receiving due to COVID is drying out. So how certain are we that we will meet this cost increase plus all the other payroll inflationary adjustment that we have to account for going forward?
Dr. Capo, I will add, I will have an update on our federal funding bill, hopefully in the next month or so. We did receive notice of a partial year apportionment. We're waiting on the full bill to be passed. We do receive federal formula dollars every year in addition to the COVID relief dollars we've received.
Thank you.
I have a bit of a follow on to what Dr. Acapo was talking about. So, you know, when you say a 5% increase, is that a 5% increase to our total expenses for the year?
We use the operating budget, so the OEM.
Okay. And then have the consultants looked at trade-offs? So for an example, you know, are weekday impacts more important than Sunday impacts?
We have looked at those trade-offs, and the weekend impacts are very difficult to model because service is sort of bare bones on the weekends. What you're seeing, the changes we're making here are largely in response to what we saw in the survey and the different kinds of feedback that we've gotten from the public over the past few studies. Now we might take this out to the public and they say this is not what we want or this is what we love, and we will take that and incorporate and see if we're really hitting what the public wants us to be focusing on. So we did look at those trade-offs. It's just a little bit difficult on Saturday and Sunday because there's not a whole lot of data available currently. Dan and George, did I hit that pretty close?
Yeah. It just seems to me you can figure it out. If you're adding service, you know, it costs something per mile.
No, the cost we can figure out. It's the ridership. It's the
oh yeah.
Yeah, the feedback, the bang for the buck, right?
Okay. I guess when I was talking about impact trade-offs, I was talking about money.
Yes, yes, we definitely looked at that, and you know what you're seeing. We frame everything in terms of miles and hours because that's how we sort of price out things, and that's why you're seeing it here. So on the weekday service, it's pretty close to revenue neutral. There's some tweaks here and there. It's the focus, the impact on weekend service, trying to bring everything to be a little bit more in conformity with what we're doing on the weekdays.
And then who's going to be impacted negatively? And it probably doesn't look like from a coverage standpoint there's that much, but maybe from a timing standpoint, I mean, is somebody whose rides are going to end up being longer than what they are currently?
Yeah, from the coverage standpoint, we're pretty close to catching everything. The Palumbo Woodhill area, where now we do service in one direction at one time of day and at a different direction at a different time of day, which is very confusing. We've seen more generation on the Codell side rather than the Palumbo side, so we've moved everything there. There might be a little bit of a longer trip in that situation. You know, I think that the reconfiguration of 17 is going to change some travel patterns, but we do hope that now connecting to downtown makes that better for everyone. You know, if you wanted to go from, say, Joyland to Eastland, there's now a trip downtown rather than that direct connection. But on the flip side of that, there's more service to get downtown now, whereas 17 currently only runs a few times per day. So we're trying to cover those folks who might have a longer trip with more access to more places and perhaps a better schedule to get around.
Yeah, so I think the last time it was probably just Christian and me were the only two board members that were in these conversations. And one of the things that came out of it, and you know, we had just built the new building, so we had all that debt to pay off. And you know, the thought was that part of it would be to try to, you know, reduce the cost so that, you know, we could pay that off. And what ended up happening, well, you know, there were certain board members that wanted to ensure that certain routes stayed in place, and then there were you know, community members that came and talked about the importance of certain routes in place. And so the board did not. The board added to what the cost recommendation was, and it did put Lextran in a precarious situation, which we would have been facing in another couple of years had it not been for COVID money. So we just need to keep all that into account as we're looking at this. So, you know, Dr. Acapo's comments are very important for everyone to absorb.
Absolutely.
George,
and
let me make
thank
sure
you
I
for that
understood.
history.
Let me make sure I understood your comment that previous previous iterations of the board's desire to protect certain routes may have increased costs where recommendations might have been to remove or reduce service to remove those costs.
Yeah, and those recommendations were really made because of money. But then, you know, when we heard the voice of the public, and then the maybe the desires of certain board members on certain routes, you know, we expanded beyond what the recommendation was. And I was only in, you know, one of my first board meetings, and I was sitting next to the person who was the finance chair at the time, and he kind of whispered to me that, you know, this is not going to work, you know, financially. And then he actually resigned like before the next meeting, and I don't know why, but he did. And then I got to, you know, take it over. So anyway, it's just it's very important that we have a sustainable financial future so that we can, you know, continue to give the best service we can give, you know, with the money that we have.
Absolutely. Thanks, George.
I don't know if this goes to Fred or Jill. I have a couple follow-up questions on the what's next. Who leads the public engagement? Is that Lextran or is that our consultant?
We will lead the public engagement, and our Dan and George will be here in support of us. So they will be here for the 4 in-person meetings. We will do the pop-up events at the transit center. We will do that internally. The internal engagement, we will do that internally. So it's a team effort, but we will be leading that.
And then I know you guys are really good at taking really complex information with a lot of variables and simplifying it so that the average person can really take this in and say, what does this mean for me? So just kind of re-emphasizing to do that. I was actually on the other side of this. I worked for a council member at the time, and people don't call their Lextran board member, they call their council member when all of these, just because not knowing the authority. And I know last time staff kind of sat down with all the council members that had affected routes to kind of walk them through that as they started to get calls. I'm guessing that's still in our public engagement plan.
We can certainly do that, Jamie. We're not at that point yet because, as you know, I do want to make sure that everyone is clear. This is just a concept right now that we are taking out for public feedback. This is not something that I'm telling you, hey, we're doing this next month. This is just a concept. And that's sort of always where we start in the public engagement processes with a concept, because often we think we think we know something and we take it out to our riders and we learn something very different. That's also why we've woven in the internal engagement, because you know, we know something based on numbers and data and what you know, perhaps Dan and George have seen and have done in other places. We then talk to our operators who operate the service and see the people every day, and they tell us something that might change our recommendation in some way. So once we get to the point where this is more than a concept and is looking like there may be something that goes forward or is dialed back, that would be the time that we would engage those council members more thoroughly so that they better understood what was happening. Obviously, the board would be fully briefed at that time too, particularly if there's additional spend involved in what we're doing.
And to follow up on that point, for example, if we decide we go through this process and we say, okay, these are the things that we want to do, there would be another round of public meetings, public engagement to say, this is what we're going to do. These are the schedules that go along with what we're going to do. And this is the date that, you know, we're planning on implementing. So again, this is just to get us the ideas that we want to pursue. The next round of engagement would be actually what the changes that we're actually going to make, if that makes sense.
Yes, thank you so much for the clarification. If I remember correctly, I just want to avoid what happens is as council members and mayors hear about it last, and then that's when you start getting all the insight in those routes that we had maybe proposed to change get added back on because of some political demand or political will or all of that. And sometimes they're also really good at getting the information out. So I don't know how, and we may also be really good at getting the information out via our public comment, but I really appreciate the differentiation between here's our proposed ideas, let's present it really simply so the average person can understand versus once we actually try to make those decisions. Thank you.
Thank you, Jamie.
Thank you.
Dan, I
Let
have
me
one
follow
question.
up. Oh,
Go ahead,
sorry.
Greg. It's Greg. Your name's not Greg.
George.
Go ahead, George.
I was going to follow up to something that Jamie said,
Please.
and something that Fred said. What expectation are we setting with the first round of the public meetings? So if we're showing some of these routes, I mean, how clear are we that people know that this is for discussion purpose? This is because I think once you show it, I mean, that becomes the expectation, and I see that happen, things that occur in different organizations I'm involved in, where something is said and then all of a sudden that becomes the expectation. And then when that expectation is not met, then all of a sudden you're taking something away from me.
That's a very good point. And the pop-up events at the transit center, we're trying to get face-to-face contact, connection, communication. And we think we can explain that better in person than we can through social media or through the storyboard website or these other methods that we have of communication. And ultimately that's probably going to happen to some degree. We will try to mitigate that as much as we can, again, through person to person. And I know we've got scheduled to be at the transit center during our combo service, which is 9:30, 10:30, and 11:30. We've done that before, to stand on the bus and say, hey, everybody, this is the ideas that we're talking about. Here's the way that you can comment, and so on and so forth. So that is, I think, our biggest path to mitigate those expectations as much as we can.
And so the most significant changes were I'm going to forget their routes now. Are we in those near those locations where the most significant changes are? Is that how you chose?
Yeah, we tried to get around town enough to make sure that we're close to where the most significant changes are happening. And again, the one here at Loudon will be live streamed that we hope people can, and we'll post the video so everyone can watch that later on as well. But we did try to, we couldn't be everywhere, but we tried to, because we looked at the system in sectors, like we had a north sector, an east sector, and a west sector, and that's how we internally sort of worked our way through the changes. And then we tried to pick something in each sector to host a public meeting.
Final question: how many people do we usually get at those public meetings?
Yeah, I've seen, like the Imagine Nicholasville Road ones, we had 100 or more, and I've seen 0. It's really, really, you never can tell what you're walking into for a public meeting.
Yeah, I've done a lot of public meetings over the years that I've been here. Jamie and I have been in very awkward public meetings with one person. And that, like I said, is potentially awkward. And I've also been at public meetings with, as Fred said, up to 100 people. I mean, it really just depends on what the topic is and what the potential change is. In my experience, the meetings that have been most well attended over the years are when you are eliminating service to an area. A lot of times you don't get a lot of feedback about potential new service until it's already been done. So we will make every effort we can to get the word out about these meetings through all of our channels. Also, reaching out through council members. They're often very helpful with their newsletters and their social media channels as well. Many of the community groups that our community engagement team and outreach team works with will be helpful in spreading the word about our meetings and our engagement opportunities as well.
Excellent. I wanted to let everybody else have their time. A quick question for you, Dan. I know that that we have the map up of everybody's, that quarter mile radius from any route. I've seen some recent new scholarship, and Fred may have prepped you for this because I bugged him about it first, about using time from stop to job as a perhaps more useful metric for determining where our service is most effective. Because the one thing that I hear from community members about why they don't use our service is that it takes too long. Like our coverage, as you can see here, is quite good from a spatial perspective. Our coverage is not good from a time perspective. And some of that's the headways that you mentioned that we can improve on those. But the other is, does the stop that's near me get me where I need to go? And that to me is a harder nut to crack. You all know a lot more about that sort of geometry and temporal balance. I'm just curious if we're using any tools to help understand where our sort of most common origins and destinations are, and how we're able to create time efficient as opposed to just spatial coverage connections.
Yeah, that's a great question. And we actually did a lot of that analysis as part of our existing conditions report. George ran a number of accessibility models looking at coverage of the existing system and accessibility to jobs. We also looked at location-based services data, which is cell phone data, to understand how people in general are moving throughout the community. And then we were able to compare that back to origin destination data collected through our onboard survey, so we could compare how transit users move versus the general public and see where there's mismatches in the markets there, to see how we could change the network to better serve that demand. So we tried to pull some of that insight into these recommendations. But more to your point, in terms of how we can measure the benefits of this proposed network, we can certainly do that as well, and we had intended to do that. The trick is you have to, not to get too far down on the weeds here, but you have to have a GTFS network in order to run that analysis. So we can certainly do that. It's just we didn't want to do it for multiple iterations of the process, right? So we're at the point now where I think it might make sense to run that, so we can show and share those benefits in terms of accessibility. We just haven't gotten to that point yet. Okay. But if that's something you're interested in seeing, we can certainly prioritize that and work on that.
Well, I don't know what a GTFS network is, so I clearly don't know much about what I'm talking about. I just it's the way in which I think that our ability to respond to our customers and to those people who would like to use our service but currently don't, time seems to be a big factor.
Absolutely. And to that point, we have created coverage maps that look at actual roadway network connectivity as opposed to just a straight line, as the crow flies distance, which we're showing here in this map. And we can easily produce that without doing the full travel time analysis, but and that certainly helps us more accurately show how many people can access the service relative to the existing roadway and pedestrian infrastructure that's so important to providing that access. George, do you have anything you want to add to that conversation?
Right. Yeah. So no, I think Dan, you hit on a lot of the important points there. It's an incredibly complicated process where, with the GTFS, you're essentially modeling every stop, what time a vehicle shows up, you're essentially creating schedules for every hypothetical change in the entire network. But we definitely do, for the existing network, we did extensive analysis on, where are the most important job centers and how long does it take to get to those. And ultimately, I think big picture, we're trying to emphasize creating as many connections as possible, where you have two routes that are just, a little bit too far away to connect in the existing system. Do we have the ability to connect route, bump it out a street and connect two routes and kind of let those riders choose for themselves as to how they're using the network and maximizing things that way? So I'm confident that if we get the opportunity to model the proposed network, we'd be able to quantify some of those advantages.
Thank you. Anything else from the group? Great. Well, George, Dan, thank you so much for this helpful presentation. Jill, if you don't mind, I would like to get this deck to the board members for their review and follow-up questions.
Sure, we can certainly do that.
Thanks.
I can send that, send it along to you when we share the comments, the document that came with the comments that our member, Jake, expressed earlier during the public comment section.
Great.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Dan and George.
Thanks, Jill.
And thank you, Cheryl. I know you're here as well.
Thank you.
Is there any new business?
Yes, Mr. Dow, I wanted to make the board aware under new business of a request that I received from our union leadership, our president and vice president of the union. I brought a request to me earlier this month. I shared that with you and also with Mr. Ward as chair of the finance committee. The union has posed a request for premium payment in recognition of the work they have done throughout the pandemic. Premium pay is a topic that has been hot in the transit industry, if you will. Many other agencies throughout the country have done some type of premium pay for their employees, be that either in a lump sum payment or something that was on top of their hourly wage. So that is something that they brought to me. Some numbers that we are working through as we consider their request that I will hopefully have ready for you shortly and bring that back to you at a future board meeting. But I did want to make the board aware of that request. Members of the union leadership, when they brought their request, highlighted that this was something that was done at LFUCG recently. The city employees received this type of payment. It was also something that was done at TARC in Louisville. So do have those bits of information to weigh out in our consideration, and we'll have that a recommendation probably for you in the future.
Thank you, Jill. Did you want to speak to any of the other proposed agenda items?
Sure. The proposed agenda items, 2 resolutions for next month. One will be a resolution to purchase an electric bus from Gillig. That is using our federal fiscal year 17 grant funds. We need to get those obligated to that project and spent before they lapse. And then we also need to confirm one of our employees as our designated ADA officer. It is an existing employee. This will just be a formality through the board to confirm that person's role.
Great, thank you. Is there any need for closed session today, either from staff or board members? All right, seeing none, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Thank you. Phil, is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Dr. Capo. All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Excellent. Thank you all so much for your time, and thanks to the staff and our consultants for hanging around with us. We'll talk to you all next month.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, board.